Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry, I didn't make you jump. Thank you for coming. This is our master class with Andy Reaser. This is an event in the Visiting Filmmaker Series, and I'm the director of the Visiting Filmmaker Series, Cynthia Fuchs. I want to thank people who helped us put this together, and that would be Andrew Jorgensen, Renee Jones, Melody Smadira, and Sam Sinagra. So thank you everybody for helping us put this together. We could not do this without you. I also want to thank the people who brought their classes, and that's Amanda Krause, and I don't know class members' names, so I'm not going to name everybody's here. Amanda Krause, Lenny Collins, Lisa Thrasher, and Peter Kimball, who I'm going to talk about in a second. This event is sponsored by the Visiting Filmmaker Series, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, the College of Visual and Performing Arts, Film and Video Studies, the English Department, Screen Cultures, University Life, and Women and Gender Studies. So thank you to all of those people. These events cannot happen without them. And I'm going to talk just for a second about Peter, and then he is going to introduce Andy. Peter Kimball is a writer and filmmaker who has taught at George Mason University since 2019. His film Millstone won the Grand Jury Prize at Slamdance and was longlisted for Best Live Action Short at the Academy Awards. You can applaud. As the father of a deaf child and an advocate for deaf representation, he frequently explores deaf themes in his films and involves deaf casts and crew. He is a graduate of Brown University, and this is news to me, he is a former bouncer at a Providence, Rhode Island martini bar.
Thank you, thank you. Usually those bouncer skills don't come into play too often, but we'll see. We'll see how the night goes. All right, well, Andy, originally from Southwest Virginia, Andy Reaser is a writer-producer with over 2 decades experience in television. He believes story is the most important and least understood element of writing. Andy approaches every new narrative as a mystery, the writer arranging puzzle pieces to reveal that story's unique identity. His credits include Charmed, Pretty Little Liars, Bel Air, and 7 seasons on Grey's Anatomy. When he isn't writing, he spends his free time taking pictures and long walks. Thank you for joining us, Andy.
Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be back. And I want to say, everybody, just Dr. Fuchs is one of like the best and most influential people in my whole like educational career. Her classes were so formative to me and exposed me to so many things that I had never seen or thought about. And just such a good thinker and so challenging to me to get me to sort of blow up my own preconceived notions and go deeper. So I think it's you guys are really lucky to have her in charge of this whole program.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, we are here to learn from you and from your wisdom and your experience. And so mostly, I think I won't do very much talking at all. But just to get us started, just wanted to hear a little bit about where you come from. You know, any your formative background that might be part of your story. And yeah, just I guess to get us started.
Yeah, the formative years aren't the really fun part. I would say being bullied and having coming from a very nasty divorced family were very formative to me and made me sort of like crouch into my shell and hide and then seek refuge in TV shows and fall in love and get comforted by those sort of things. That was very formative to me. My dad was a band director. I was a student in the band at a rival school. So I had this sort of Oedipal thing going on with trying to defeat my own father on the marching band field. And but you know, I love being from the mountains. I love the quietness of where I grew up and the beauty and the nature. But those were sort of the big fundamental factors in the in the primordial ooze. It was a lot of unhappiness, but that can turn into something beautiful later on.
Well, coming out of that, what were some of those shows or so those media things that stood out to you that you really latched onto or that shaped you earlier on?
There was the NBC was really big with the comedies in the 80s when I was growing up. Some famous shows that don't need to be mentioned right now necessarily due to who created them and things we've learned about them. But Twin Peaks was a huge formative experience for me. That came out when I was in high school, and it just really, I had never seen anything like it. It was full of mystery and wonder and strangeness. And I'd say that was the single most influential thing. Apart from that, maybe like Pee Wee Herman and Pee Wee's Big Adventure and Tim Burton movies, which are were also very strange and had a sort of out there sense of humor, but very, very big influences on me.
Great. And did you, it, when you were younger, did you view yourself as a creative person? Were you getting inspiration from these and something you wanted to create one day, or did that come together later on?
I fell in love. I was the younger, I was like on the younger side of kids in my neighborhood. So there were bigger kids around, and my parents had lots of friends over. I fell in love with the sound of laughter at an early age, um, kind of even before I knew how it worked. And then I wanted to generate that from other people. So I would tell jokes even if I didn't understand them. And I do think that helped me learn the rhythm of storytelling and pacing because there's a kind of musicality to storytelling and jokes that's in the DNA of it, even if you don't fully understand the content of what you were saying. So I was telling jokes I did not even come close to getting to adults, and um, that was a big part of it. So I guess I always felt like a little bit of an entertainer who was looking for friendly audiences. And laughter is sort of a way to diffuse tense situations.
Absolutely. It's always nice to have a friendly audience. Moving on, and I think that of particular interest to this group, going back to your time in school and in college, uh, what did you study? What did you find valuable about that time? Any memories or things that you felt particularly shaping in that experience?
Um, Part of it, coming from southwestern Virginia and Roanoke, it was a very small and sort of homogenous world. So being in the greater DC area, it opened my eyes to lots and lots of other, cultures and ways of living, and that was really wonderful to me. One of the best things that I picked up in college, and it was in Dr. one of her classes, and also David Kaufman. Um, their curriculum involved writing a short paper every week because Kaufman would say, like, once you graduate college, you're not going to really be turning in term papers. You're going to mainly be having to make your arguments in a small space. And so having to do that for multiple classes and just write these small arguments over and over and over again has been so beneficial and really helped develop a muscle that I think is was really great. And then, being exposed to all kinds of other things and seeing a lot of indie, uh, you know, underground kind of movies. I mean, there were things in some of Cindy's classes that I think would be considered cutting edge now, and that was, 30 years ago.
Are there things? What did you major in school?
I started as theater because I had been in plays in high school, and I thought that was the path of least resistance. Um, and then I got into the theater. I was studying theater, and I realized that like actors have a level of commitment and seriousness about the craft that I didn't share. Like it was just sort of pretend and make believe to me. And I found that I wasn't drawn to that as much as I was to what I was reading in playwriting classes and learning in English classes. So then I segued to being an English major with a minor in film studies, maybe. I think, I don't know if that had fully formed at that point, but I did take a lot of film classes at Mason. And it was right when the theater, like, I don't know what it's called. It's like a smaller theater with it has a 35 millimeter projector, and that opened my senior year, so we could see movies like crazy and on a big screen instead of in a library, and that was just fantastic.
I think people might be a little spoiled for how easy it is to see whatever movie they want these days, but that was more of a special thing. So just one more question sort of about your college time. If you are there things that after you were done with school, thinking back in retrospect, you wish you'd taken more advantage of, or you wish you'd done a little differently?
Yes, like for me personally in college, I had the least amount of life pressure on me and the most free time and the most energy. And I wish that I had generated more material. And it could have been music, it could have been making short films or videos. Uh, because once you get out of college and and it's not part of a class, you can't get credit for it. It becomes harder to fit in the space to do those things. So I do wish that I had just generated as much material as humanly possible. And uh, this might be a good time to segue because we're kind of coming out of the college part of it. But so I like to talk about basketball. I grew up, I had a hoop in my backyard. I loved shooting baskets. It was so fun. I would just walk around my yard and do it. And I thought that that meant that I liked playing basketball. But once we started playing basketball at school, it was like squeaky shoes and armpits and elbows in my face while I was trying to just shoot a ball. And that was so much harder. And I realized that like basketball as a game is something entirely different from just shooting hoops. And once you get into the professional world, you kind of might have this idea that writing is like this solitary venture and you're just going to sit down and work on it. But when you get into the industry, writing is much more of doing that with elbows and armpits in your face. And I think if you can spend as much time as possible perfecting your craft and getting the writing part down to where it's second nature and thinking about story as it's second nature, it won't be as difficult for you when the other stressors come into play. You want to just take advantage of that time and get that muscle as developed as you possibly can.
That sounds like great advice. The I think I want to just ask this as a question, but then hopefully it's just sort of a launching point for you to think about. But the wanting to think about how did you get started in your career in writing? How did that actually work out for you coming out of college? What were the steps? How did that all work? And I think that's of great interest to a lot of people here. But just wanted to, I don't know as many specific questions to ask, but I'd love to hear just a little bit of your journey.
So there became a job opening on Charmed, the original Charmed, for a production assistant in the writer's office. I applied for that. I knew through someone who had gone to Hollins had a connection with a writer on Charmed who was leaving, but at least like was able to tell me about the job and sort of tell me when to apply and how to interview. So I did that. I didn't know at the time, but they were interviewing dozens and dozens of people. Um, I sent a thank you note. Highly recommend thank you notes. And then I waited for a long time and didn't know if I got the job or not and was sort of doing odd jobs. And then I got a call several months later and they said, "When can you start as the PA?" So, and the thing that had stood out was I had sent a thank you note. So when they were looking through like and trying to remember whom they had met, they were like, "Oh, this guy, how about him?" Like he seemed motivated. So that got me in the door. That job at the time involved a lot of photocopying, a lot of grocery shopping, a lot of script collating, a lot of lunch orders, a lot of menial errands. Um, it is Hollywood and television especially is it's I think it's a little unusual in that the way that you get started is often by doing something that has nothing to do with what the job eventually is. Like there's no part of show running that involves, making sure the refrigerator is stocked. But I guess they just want to see the fire in your belly. Um, that show, when I wasn't doing those tasks, allowed me to be in the writer's room, quietly sitting on a sofa and listening and hearing seeing how the stories got put together as they were assembling them. Then, I read every script. I wrote synopses for the episodes. That was where that other thing of the one-page arguments really came into play, like being succinct and all of that. Um, then I was fortunate enough that the show stayed on the air long enough that by my third season, I got the chance to co-write a script. Then my fourth year there, I co-wrote a script and was partly on staff for for 14 weeks of the season. And then in the final season, I was fully on staff. Um, all through that time, I was also writing spec samples of other shows. I really thought I was going to make it in comedy, going back to my love of laughter, but that never really struck for me. So I had a lot of half hour, I had, Bernie Mac, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Friends samples that nothing happened with. Um, and then I started writing pilots and other, original material as well. So during that time when I was an assistant in my free time, I would say that I wrote at least like 10 to 12 scripts just to be working on samples and getting better and better at that form of storytelling. Charmed ended. I had written a pilot about my experience in high school band growing up, that what is now Freeform, but was then ABC Family. Some execs really liked that and paid me to write a pilot that didn't get produced. Um, and this was pre Pretty Little Liars. Like they had nothing had really like struck for them. And I think they were just happy to know somebody who was happy to talk to them and didn't feel like it was a waste of their time. But that relationship led to them putting me up for several of their shows. Um, and I worked on Pretty Little Liars eventually, Huge, which was a show about fat camps, The Nine Lives of Chloe King, Twisted, a lot of shows that you haven't heard of, The Middleman, which was a really fun show. And I did that in the like 2007 into 2013 over those years. And then someone I had worked with on Charmed worked on Grey's Anatomy, and when that job opportunity came up, I got a meeting on it. I met twice. I met once and didn't get the job, and then 2 years later, I met again and I did get the job. And by that time, I was, fully writing and producing, going to set, and then eventually became the number two on the show, which is a non-official title, but it's basically the person the showrunner relies on to do lots of rewriting, pushing story forward in the room, going to sound mixes, just anything that they're too busy to do, the number two does. And I did that for 3 years, sometimes with somebody else helping me because it was, doing 20 and 24 episodes was a lot of work, but that's the broad trajectory of it. And then I got kind of burned out during COVID thinking about hospitals and death all the time. So I wanted a break and I went and just sold a script I had written and then worked on Bel Air. And now I'm just working on some other projects uh, that are less hospital oriented.
Okay. And just to the crowd here, we're going to talk a little bit about Andy's career. I want to also spend some time talking about the craft specifically. So both what jobs in Hollywood look like, but also writing specifically, and then we'll have time for a Q&A from the audience as well. I should have maybe mentioned that at the beginning, but that's sort of the flow of what we're hoping for right now. But Andy, just getting back to what you were saying, going back to the beginning of what you said, just one thing, as we're in Virginia right now, when you first applied for that first job, you were already in LA, you had gone to LA with a plan, or you were in Virginia? How did that first step work?
I had moved here, and I had put all my eggs in the basket of trying to make that work. I mean, there might be some more opportunities remotely nowadays with technology that totally didn't exist in 2001. Um, but I feel like uh, to the basketball of it, these jobs are so coveted, and there is a finite number of them. So you you really want people are going to look for somebody who is completely committed and has thrown their entire all of their weight behind trying to make this dream work. So yeah, I had really just moved out with a lot of optimism. um, I sometimes say I was too young to know what a insane idea it was. But the earlier you start, the more energy you have, and the more resilient you are. So I think that helped me quite a bit. But yeah, I had come out here hoping to get a job. There was nothing in place.
Okay, I think that's really I think useful sort of concrete experience for some of the folks here. Um, just some of the other things I noticed I was wondering about based on what you were saying. Um, Working on a bunch of different shows, is the experience very different one show to the next? Does it change your experience as a writer based on which specific show you're working on?
Every show had, the personality of the showrunner is going to dictate a lot of sort of the day to day and the mood and the work style and the work pattern. Like you might have a boss who is um really wants to get home to their family. You might have a boss who is going through a breakup and wants to stay late. So that element of the show of the job changes from show to show, but the core needs and the basics of it are tend to be the same. And that is if it's a pilot you've been hired on, you come in, you have a couple weeks where you're coming up with your pitch for the season, pitch for early episodes. You pitch those to the studio and to the network. You get feedback. You roll in that feedback. Then um, that turns into script assignments and going through breaking individual episodes. And then taking those through production. Like that's looked the same on just about every show that I've worked on. During the pandemic, it changed slightly for a while because there were a lot of Zoom rooms because people couldn't meet safely in person. But even that now, rooms are getting back to being in person. So that's it. There, I'd say there's more similar between jobs than there is different. Even if it's a show, Grey's Anatomy and Pretty Little Liars could not be more different. But you're still thinking of what's the emotional arc for the character in that episode? What are the steps that you're going to take to do it? You're going to come up with the storyline for every character and then weave those together into an outline form and then go off to write the script. That's been true of every show I've worked on.
And how does the balance of, you were talking about the basketball comparison, and I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of writing on your own. How does that work in reality, working in a group, working with a showrunner? What is the dynamic like in terms of how episodes and seasons are actually created?
So there's a hybrid to what you're doing because there are times when you go off to write your script or write your scenes. That's the time when you're all on your own, no one's in your backyard, and you're just throwing the basketball and reconnecting with what made you fall in love with it. Um, the sheer volume of material that needs to be generated in a normal season of television is, with very rare exceptions, um, too much for any individual to do on their own without the aid of um, substances or some sort of supernatural ability. Uh, so you really need the writer's room because that speeds things up. When you have an idea, you might get an idea and you think about it for a while and then you walk around with it, and then you talk to a friend when they want to hear about it and they say, "Oh, I like that part," or "I don't like that part." Um, you need to do that. It's at a really accelerated rate in a television room. So the group dynamic is very important. It's a very safe place to do, usually when the room starts, they'll say, like, there's no bad ideas, there's no dumb ideas. Uh, you have to be vulnerable to say, what if this thing happened to this character that seems insane? And it could be the wrong thing for the character, but that often will spark something in somebody else. And then as a group, you get into this rhythm and you come up with it. Uh, it's there's a I used to say the destruction of your ego, but somebody else said ego death is a more common term. But uh, film and television, the industry is a very will provide the opportunity for ego death if that's something you're interested in, because you're going to work on your craft so much that your emotions eventually become separate from the craft, in the way that a musician might play a note and it's flat or sharp. uh that they don't get a their feelings don't get hurt. It's like, no, that's just flat. I need to fix it. I need to know what to do to fix it. And so being in the room helps you uh work through any of that, like, I'm not good enough to say this idea, or this is so dumb I shouldn't do it. You just have to get it out there, and then if it's bad, move away from it, and it's fine. You're almost, I don't want to say receptacles, but the ideas are coming in and then you're sharing them all and you're finding them together.
Just as you're talking about that, the subject of feedback and notes and how you work, either you looking at someone else's writing or them looking at yours, what have what have you found to be most helpful there, either in communicating to other people? I mean, and you were sort of saying this already, but in terms of communicating your notes to other people, or in terms of taking notes as a writer, any suggestions or things that you found particularly helpful and useful with that?
So when it comes to taking notes, it gets into that, try to to depersonalize the process as much as you possibly can. And depending on your upbringing, your personality, your star sign, you're going to have various reactions when people give you criticism that you need to just sort of manage on your own and just welcome it, because if the goal is to make the best possible piece of writing that you can, the best possible story, then um anything that is hindering that, anything that's not working, is really your enemy. That's the enemy, is the part of the story that isn't working. So it's not the person giving you notes. So you just want to find that out and attack it. I mean, it's like, I'm sure people who tell stories and are great at it, and there are people who tell stories and they bog you down with so many details. Like, the moment somebody is yawning, um, that's your responsibility to keep them from yawning. And so I would say welcome those reactions, and think about what's causing those reactions. Um, when it comes to giving notes to other people, I find I really try to think about, what does their piece of writing want to be, as opposed to what do I want it to be. So when I give notes, I try not to think. Some people do this. They'll say, like, well, make it like this and make it like this and make it like this. And they're not really thinking about the material as as something that they might not even be for them. I don't particularly love Lifetime movies, but I could give notes on a Lifetime movie and help it be um, what it wants to be. So I think if you're giving notes to other people, you should be very honest with your reactions. You should say, writers usually need some sort of praise because we're weak in that. So lead with compliments, say what's working, and then if something's not working, talk about why it's not working. Like I found myself losing interest here, or I found myself confused here, and just try to be as constructive as you can about it, even if it's a genre that you would, never think would be for you. Um, Another thing about receiving the criticism is sometimes people will say like, I didn't like this part of your script, and I think you should do this instead. And then you'll think, well, no, that's not right. And then you might dismiss the entire note. Don't do that. If somebody tells you when something's not working, even if their pitch is wrong, their gut instinct, that's the person yawning, that's the person picking up their phone and checking it. That's you failing to hold their attention. So even if their solution isn't the right solution, um, you should take that as an indicator that you could be more riveting in that moment, or in regards to that story beat.
And in terms of, in receiving feedback, are there times when, I mean, people can be wrong when or people, but so how do you know, how do you make a decision about whether you want to be, humble and accept this and change your script, or no, I actually think that I'm right and that your read on this is wrong, or how do you, if that's your initial reaction, how do you approach that?
I think I would probably turn it up to a second opinion. If you really feel at odds with each other, then I would give it to someone else to read. Don't tell them what the note was. Don't lead with people are telling me this isn't working, and then see what they say, and then talk it through with somebody else, because it really could be that, you know, you're going to find out in your life who is good at giving notes and who is really, really bad and unhelpful. So good feedback generally excites you and makes you, but because you want the thing to be better. So when you hear it, you're like, oh, I'm excited now. Even if it's a lot of notes, you start to like see the path forward. So I mean, there's a gut check to every element. Um, David Lynch would say, always be true to the idea. And, if something else comes in that is starting to change it, um, if you feel like the idea in its heart, the thing that you fell in love with, if you feel like that's starting to wither, then don't take the advice. But if it's truly, not harming it and maybe making it more accessible or opening the door, then then you should welcome it. You can also try the note and look at it and say like, no, that really isn't right. There's no harm in, because even if you rewrite a storyline, um the worst thing that's going to happen for you to rewrite a storyline incorrectly is that you got more practice writing. So it's not the end of the world to do that, even if it feels like it might be a waste of time.
That's great. I want to talk more, we're sort of segueing into more of the craft and storytelling, but I wanted to, just before we transition over to that too much, just wanted to, in terms of working in the industry, working in Hollywood, how have things changed over the years? And, how are, from your experience, do you think that's the same way it is now from when you were starting out? How, or have things evolved? How have things changed over the years?
I would say in general, the movement is in the direction of healthier workplaces. Uh, that's not a guarantee, but um, when I started, my first boss did and said things that were just accepted and overlooked and established as normal, which were really kind of abusive and not all right. Um, but if I, when I'm being my most merciful and generous, he had created an environment that was light years better than the environment he came up with in the 80s and 90s. He would tell stories about when he had his first job. Uh, it would be all white men. Um, they would show up hungover. They would go to a huge lunch, do drugs and get drunk, and then work in the afternoon. Some of you are like, "Man, that sounds great. Let's bring back the glory days." But but and then like work until midnight and never see your kids. So like for him to create an environment that was fairly stable and had regular hours felt like a huge improvement over what where he had come from. That didn't mean that there wasn't still room to improve. And so I think that's something that's changing in the sort of like the character or like the spirit of the industry. Um, you know, there have been a lot of mergers. There are fewer buyers than there used to be. There are more outlets for shows to be on, but it and there's more competition certainly now than there ever was before. Um, but there's also been tons and tons of incredible TV shows. So, uh, but it has been interesting to watch that change. Like when there were three networks, a show, and they all don't, probably don't know a lot about ratings, but like, um, a show could have 30 million viewers and get canceled because it only had 30 million viewers. And for a show today to have $30 million, 30 million viewers would be, I mean, it would be the biggest hit anybody's ever heard of or conceived. So as cable and streaming has gotten bigger and bigger, there's more outlets and you're more likely to find something sort of tailor-made for your interests and more maybe niche. But even so, I think that everybody is still wishing for that huge knock it out of the park. Everybody loves this show and wants to watch it kind of a thing. They're just fewer and farther between.
And when you say there's a lot of competition now, or I'm sure there's always been competition, but even more competition now, do you think people starting out is the key to just be the best writer? Are there things that you can do to set yourself apart from the competition? What would be your advice there in terms of how to succeed in a competitive market?
So you know, what's the serenity prayer? Grant me the wisdom to know the difference. So like there's a lot of things that are in your control and a lot of things that are not in your control. And the things that are out of your control are can be very dispiriting, can get you down, can make you feel like things aren't fair, but you have no control over them. So the sooner you can let go of that, the better. The worst thing that can happen for you individually in your career is you get an opportunity, somebody who has power to help you asks to read something and they say what would you like me to read, and you say, well, I'm working on this thing, but my friend didn't like it, and I'm doing notes on that, and I wrote this other thing, but then that's kind of like this show, so I'm not really sure. Like, can I get back to you, or will you read something that and just tell me what you think, even though I already know it doesn't work? Like, there's a term, come correct. You want to come correct because that is in your control. So write your scripts, be brutal with them. I tell people, and this is a lofty goal, but your goal should be to write something that's so good that if someone reads it, they have got to pick up the phone and tell someone else to read it because they you have blown them away. You have your voice, your sense of pacing, all of it was so good that they wanted to share it and they wanted to help you because people want to help good people. So the thing that everybody should be doing, and I encourage all of you to be doing, is finding your voice, writing spec scripts, writing examples of shows that are already on the air, because it's like doing scales if you're a musician. You just want to be able to run those up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. I um and like when I started writing, it would take me weeks to write an episode of a TV show. Um, when our Grays was such a grueling, fast-paced environment. We would have to write it. We'd get notes on a script. The whole thing would blow up, and it was already 2 days into prep, and we had to generate a new script overnight. And that idea, while it's not my ideal working circumstances or conditions, I got to where I could do it. So now when somebody tells me like, "Oh man, I've only got 6 days to write my script," I literally think like, "Well, what are you going to do for the first four?" Because it's only going to take two to write the script. So you just want to get that muscle down, like work on it, work on it, work on it, work on all kinds of genres. Just get as good as you possibly can.
What does your writing routine then look like? How do you approach the actual physical act of writing, or mental act of writing? But how do you approach the writing itself?
Um, I Unless you're just doing a free writing assignment, I highly recommend that you work out the story beats first. Um, the way I talk about story is if you just sat down with somebody and told them what happens in your show or your movie, they would be riveted just by what's happening. It doesn't even have to have good dialogue. It's not like they're not looking at a movie star that's making them have, feelings in their heart. It's just being able to tell the story is interesting enough on its own. So I always work out the story first, and that usually comes from taking. Uh, I have to do things that aren't looking uh, at the computer screen. So sometimes I write it out longhand. I journal about what I want the story to be. I talk it through with friends. I'll take long walks and just sort of think about it over and over again. Like anything that doesn't look like writing, your brain is still working and you're going to come up with those ideas. Then I try to write the beats out as briefly as possible just so that I know what they are. And then that leaves some room for discovery once you sit down at the laptop and start writing. I don't recommend writing at a desk, but if you can do it, great. But your your back might suffer over the years. Um, and but yeah, I try to get it. And I also, you want to do some self-examination. I feel like every idea, it like it gets born in a certain way, and it never it's not going to get born again. So if you have an idea and you're out with your friends and you're like, man, I had this thought for a movie, and then like, what if I do this and I do this, and it's not fleshed out really in your head, you're going to internalize their reaction if they're kind of like, oh, maybe, I guess. And then you can lose interest and then you're not going to work on the idea anymore. So I really encourage people to, kind of have an idea of what you want the story to be. Um, and really know that before you start sharing it, because there's an incubation period that you want to do, or a gestational period that is important between you and the muses or wherever stories come from. That's important to you want to give it you want to get it a little bit more formed so that it's not a premature sort of delivery, and then it's not ready to make it in the world.
That's great advice. Where and so you're talking about these ideas, and thinking of it being born and fully formed. Um, so I guess a question is, where do you find inspiration from? And I wonder both if you're just sort of writing your own project that you're just starting on your own, or also in situations where you're on contract to write something, or working on staff to write something. But where do you find inspiration from?
Um, so going back to the depressing way that I opened, Flannery O'Connor, I think, is credited with saying that anybody who has survived childhood has enough material to sustain a full career as a writer. So there is a lot personally with me that I draw on from my childhood or early dynamics or memories from that time period. Um, and then it's really just what happens in your life. I tend to, I'll have a conversation, a friend will do something, and then I, I'll think like, oh, what if that hadn't worked out? And then that sort of can lead to other ideas. And that's true of your own writing or if it's writing for another show. I'm trying to think of an example from Gray's. What is something that I can practically say? Because I know it's happened before, but what like you'll just like on Grey's Anatomy, our showrunner was a recovering alcoholic and had put a character in recovery, and that generated lots and lots of story for that person, and she was just borrowing that from her life. Um, Peter, as you talked about, or Dr. Fuchs talked about at the beginning, like your experience as a parent, that's something that you draw from. Um, you know, you the more you're a unique gift to the world, every one of you, and you have a unique story that is special to you. And writing and storytelling, it really helps people. Like it helps people in their lives to not feel as alone. And so it's valuable for you to be able to take experiences that you've had or struggles that you've had and then find a way to dramatize them because that will connect with somebody. And there's all different ways to connect with people. So even if you're kind of out there and or feel like you're weird, like there is something that you have lived and done that is unique to you that and talking about it is going to connect with someone else's heart.
That's I wonder with, um, do you feel does the same thing hold true if it is a totally original thing that you're working on, that you're writing, that's drawing from your experience, or you're tasked with writing an episode of an existing show? Do you feel the same way about putting your own heart and experience into it, or does that end up feeling different?
Um, there are uh okay. I think I can talk about this. And it's been in a documentary, so I think it's safe to talk about. But like I have a friend who learned when she was an adult that she had been conceived in sexual assault. And she um, offered that to the show, and it became a really incredibly moving episode. But that became the origin story of one of the characters, and the outpouring that has happened, you know, has been incredible, and the response to that episode. Because it was a TV show, she wasn't the writer of that episode. She just shared it with the room. And that that story that is very uh, terrible and personal is a part of Hollywood and IMDb now, and it's attached to another writer. So you're like people aren't really going to know that that's her, and it's so I would say that if you're going to give something to a show that's the most deeply traumatic personal thing of your origin, like you might want to think twice about that. But um, you can still find other ways to do that. But so like there are probably things in my life that I would say I don't want to give that to, you know, Pretty Little Liars. Like this was something that was deeply formative to me and means a whole lot. And I don't think uh, fashion fashion designer teenagers who are being cyberbullied are the right place for that formative horror of my existence to come across. But you it's up to you. You can still give those things to shows. But I do think it's important uh, to keep something for yourself and for your own projects.
And you were talking about, whether it's drawing from your own personal experience or just an idea that occurs to you going about your life. Uh, how do you, well, how does one, but also specifically, what's your process for working through whether this is worth really spending time on and developing? What, you know, you have lots of good ideas,
Right.
not all of them will work, so how do you go about that?
Um, I usually start, I imagine it, and with me, it's journaling. I do it longhand, or I do it when I'm walking, and I just start, I talk through the idea, and then it's like a lot of ideas, um, ideas can take different shapes. Um, Fargo the movie is one thing. Fargo the series, draws from a lot of different things and became a series, but you wouldn't have necessarily like it took somebody with some vision to think like, "Oh, what if I made a TV show that's like based on the entire like body of work of some directors and writers." Um, Talking through an idea just to yourself, like working through it, you'll see when it starts to run out of breath. It'll hit the ground running. But sometimes and this happens to me, like I've so many times, and it used to drive me crazy. I would pitch things to my wife, and she'd say like, "Oh, that seems like a great sketch on Saturday Night Live." And I'm like, "No, it's a whole movie. You don't understand." Um, but a lot of times she was right, and now I just have a file in my on my computer called sketches where just truly insane and bizarre things that are really only just to entertain myself. I have an outlet for those. But when you talk through things, if you have an idea sort of like, and you're like, oh, I think this should be a TV show, and here is my core premise, start asking yourself questions because you're going to need to pitch those to executives if you ever have that opportunity. Um, they're not going to want to just know like, what was my great 1 hour jumping off point to this story. They're going to want to know where the first season ends, and then they're going to want to know what seasons 2 and 3 and 4 look like. And if you can't come up with those, and if those are feeling like just brick walls, then either you need to keep thinking about it or come at it in a different way, or you might have an idea that and you're trying to put it into the wrong cookie mold or the wrong cake mold. It might just be a feature. It might be a short film. It might be a poem. It might be a song. Um, but I think that you can, and once you have a sense of it and you start talking through it with other people, you'll start to see where it wants to go and where it starts to run out of steam. The reason that procedurals are so popular, and there's always cop shows and there's always lawyer shows and there's always medical shows, is that premise uh, just never we haven't yet run out of the need for, like, crime still happens all the time. People still sue each other all the time, and people still get hurt and injured all the time. So the world is just providing free material for those things, whereas something that's not a procedural is going to need to have its own uh you're going to want to you're going to need to see where it goes. Like Mad Men, for instance, is very untraditional in the sense that it, had 8 seasons, but it's not a procedural. But it did have a very specific journey, and it had an evolution over time. Um, but it comes back to kind of being hard on yourself, talking through the idea with friends, and really thinking like, is this going to be like, oh my gosh, how many like, there's so many shows now that feel like they'll even say like, we think of it as a 12-part movie, and I'm like, well, that's too long for a movie. Like you know you're like, what? Or somebody says, oh, trust me, like you just got to watch the first 6 episodes and then it gets incredible. And you're like, well, that's not, even if though it's on the air, like I don't think that should be your goal. You want to hook people right away, and and you want to and you want to know that you're not going to run out of steam, because you don't want to, much like I feel like I'm doing right now, I'm talking past having made the point. I should just cut bait.
Well, it's just one. Let's see. I had a couple other questions, and in just a little bit, I'm going to turn the time over to some questions from the audience. But so I'll give you a little bit of a heads up. So be thinking of your questions right now. But I still have the microphone for a little bit longer, Andy. But do you have abandoned scripts, or do you feel like once you get to the point of you're actually going to sit down to write this, it's important to see it through? How does that work for you?
I don't have a lot of abandoned scripts. I have scripts that have been abandoned by the world, uh, that I still hope for. But I wrote a script in 2009 that was about Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. It was I pitched it as the X-Files set in Victorian London. Um, I loved it. People loved it. Nobody bought it. But my manager just never stopped believing in it. And then in 2021 was like, I feel like we need to just re-envision this script and like have another go at it. And then we worked with it. We found a director who liked it. We sold it. We went through the notes process. We got this really tight, like network procedural script. And right at the finish line, the head of the network was like, "Oh, vampires?" And then that was it for now. And hopefully someday in the future it'll get another chance. But um, yeah, I've written. I usually finish the script and then have it as a sample or something that just means something to me. Things I've actually started by the time I'm typing, I'm usually so in love with it that I'm going to finish it. The abandon phase is like notebooks and journal entries or little scrap pieces of paper. I also want to say, just as a useful piece of advice, and I'm sure you've heard this before. It's another thing I've learned. I've known my whole life, but I've heard David Lynch talk about it too in a way that was kind of funny. But have your notes app with you always. Have a notebook and a piece of paper always. When you have an idea, write it down. Even if you're busy, even if it's on a napkin, write that idea down because you will forget it if you don't. And when you forget an idea, it is the worst feeling in the world. You want to die. It is so awful. It's like this butterfly landed on your fingertip and you didn't take a picture. And then you're like, what did it look like? I want to see it again. I want to be with it again. And that happens. Another, just on that note, a piece of tough learning I'll say is, um, there is you can call it the collective unconscious, but especially when you're out in a creative field, if you don't write your idea, if you don't make that script, somebody else is going to do it. And that is another terrible, terrible feeling. When you had an idea and you noodled with it and you're like, I don't know, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. And then in 3 years, you see a billboard for your idea that somebody else who had the same idea and took it through to completion. Um, it's not a good feeling. And I highly recommend you avoiding it at all costs. So get those ideas on paper and finish them. Um, because the ideas, and this is like woo woo, I'm in California, but like I feel like the ideas want to be in the world, the stories want to exist. And if the idea chooses you to land on and you don't do it, it's gonna go to way to somebody else who will.
Okay, great advice there. So I'd love to now take some time for questions from the audience. For you all, if you have questions to ask Andy, we'll have a mic going around. Just raise hands if you want to ask a question.
I'm gonna make it full size.
Hi, I had a question about your thoughts about the interaction between video editing and script writing, because sometimes people say that the editor makes the final version of the script. And do you think about editing at all when you're writing a script?
I think about it a little bit. My approach to writing a script is you want to, you want somebody to feel like they've seen the movie, like they've just watched it. Um, and maybe counterintuitively, you don't do that by putting in a lot of camera moves. You don't say like, we're drifting across, a close angle on this, because that takes people out of it. You just want to describe what they're seeing. Um, and reading scripts is really helpful to do that, to see how other people do that. That's another thing I highly recommend. Um, Thinking about it is editing. I mean, yeah, like the script is its own thing and it has its own job, which is to make people fall in love with the idea. But because it's a collaboration, everyone's gonna bring something to it. And if it if it just needed to be a script, it would just be a script and everybody would pass it around and read it and it wouldn't need to be seen. So I think thinking like an editor, I believe thinking as an editor, it comes in a little bit more handy once you're on set and choosing your shots than it does when you're on the page. Although you can kind of, create edits by saying, I'll over my dead body, and then, cut to their dead body. Like you can do that in a script, and you've kind of, given the edit a sense of where it's going to go.
Great, thanks. Next question.
Hi, my question is when you're writing a story, do you also think about like this, how it's gonna sound in the story? Like, do you hear music when you're writing, or do you hear, like, are you visioning it?
I listen to music often when I'm getting inspired by a scene. I don't usually set it to music, but I know a lot of writers who really do. Like they're like, "Oh, this is the song that's playing over this scene." Um, I'll often just say like a needle drop. Under a needle drop, we go to this, and we see these things, and you kind of describe the style of music, or maybe even uh, a specific song. Um, the musicality of the dialogue, I think, is very important. So I do like to read scenes out loud, or on Grey's Anatomy, we would do writers' tables reads where we had before we even published the script, we'd have a version of it, and the whole writers' room would get together, be assigned parts, and we'd read through the script, and you just uh, that does come in handy. Like some people have more of an ear for dialogue than others, and uh, if you struggle with that, it can be very important to try to like read it out loud, see if you're stumbling. You'll also hear like, oh, I've said the word that several times in this thing, and that didn't jump out to me till I was listening to it. So I do think reading through your dialogue, especially, is very important.
What do you do when you feel like stuck in writing the script?
Oh, when I'm stuck, you you very rarely are going to get unstuck sitting at the computer screen. So I highly recommend going and doing something else. There's a term, and I don't know if I'm using it correctly, but it sounds good, called background processing, which is when you give a computer a task, as I understand it, that uses sort of it doesn't use the main framework or operational processing of the computer. It just is happening. It's a thing that just can keep going while the computer is doing other things. And we do that in our lives. Your brain is always background processing. And it's fun. In Mad Men, he gives a piece of advice. That show, by the way, is about television writing and having a TV show. So if you want to see something that's very much about the creative process, I recommend that show. Um, but he says to a younger writer who's struggling, he says, think about it really hard and then put the idea out of your head, go to a movie, take a walk, and then the answer will just pop up. So there's a thing, I think it was the three B's or the three C's. It was something about like, the bus, the bed, and the bath. Meaning, if some often, I mean, so many times you'll get an idea if you're taking a shower or as soon as you lay down in bed or if you're on a long road trip. Like find those things that you do when it feels like the ideas pop into your head and give yourself permission to take a break because you don't you don't force everything. And another teacher I had, a poetry teacher at Mason, would say that like the cure for writer's block is reading, because you have a well of words and ideas within you, and that might just get a little depleted, in which case you should just read poetry or go watch a movie or do anything that's different and give your brain muscle a little bit of time to sort of like, it's almost like you want it to have time to interact with your subconscious or your unconscious. And you can't force that out. So yeah, just take breaks and watch other things. Also, watch things that you love or like made you want to fall in love with writing in the first place. I think that's very helpful.
Thank you.
We're gonna get to you on the second row, I promise. Don't give up hope. Or third row.
Hi. So when writing characters, how do you strike that balance of making them have like real, believable actions and reactions with other characters, but also making them memorable and like bigger than life and eccentric and having those traits that make people want to watch them?
I love that question. Um, how do you strike that balance? I often try to, when I'm working on a script, I'll try to think of a line of dialogue that the character might say, even if it's not in the script, but a line of dialogue that I feel sums up their worldview. And then I can go back to that. Like I wrote a pilot once, and my two lines for the characters were, one of them was, God wouldn't let that happen. And I felt like that, to me, I was just like, I understand this person's worldview. I understand how they think things operate, how they think the world functions. And the other characters was, I used to be mad at God for killing my daughter. Now I think he did her a favor, which told you a lot, or told me a lot about how he viewed the world and how hopeless and dire it was. So I think that having in your head that like quintessential, like what really is uniquely them about this character, and you can come back to that. Um, and then it's just, uh, you know, I, you're faking dialogue and interactions when you're writing a script. So there's a way that really gripping writing grabs you that is different from your everyday life. So there's a kind of artifice that you want it to have to make it more entertaining than just your life. So I also highly recommend, like when I wrote my first script for Charmed, I remember giving it to a senior writer, and she gave me a great piece of advice. And I was like, she said, there's nothing wrong with it, but you have one character say something and the other person listens to that and thinks about it and then responds to what they just said. And that would make you a very good listener and a very good therapist, but it doesn't make great television. So, you know, everybody everyone thinks they're the main character in their world, and all of your characters should sort of have that main character attitude of themselves. So when you're writing a back and forth, you know, you as a writer secretly have the priority of getting your story across, but that isn't the priority of every character in the show. So, you know, your lead might say something, but your other character might be worried about their, you know, the massage appointment they've booked getting canceled, and that's all they can think about. So that's like the, I think that's where the entertaining part comes in, when you make it less like, you know, real life, and then more like more like that artifice that makes it fun. And then you just, you know, you balance it out. Because if it's a comedy, then people can say things that aren't like, they don't necessarily have to talk the way that you would talk in real life. But if it's a show like Adolescence, um, you know, they are gonna skew more believable than realistic just because of the nature of what the show is doing.
Thank you.
Thanks. I like that zoom in. That was real helpful. Whoever's on, is that the other Andy?
Yep.
Thanks.
You bet.
There was one to your right, Doctor. A woman with brown hair that was a little, I think, maybe blocked.
Told you I'd get you.
Oh, thank you. My question was about research. How do you approach that in terms of like world building for your own scripts or world building for a script, for a spec script?
Um, you know, there's definitely such a thing as too much research, and you yourself you're going to have to ask yourself, do I over research or do I under research? But I think ideally, like with my Bram Stoker script, I read, biographies of him, biographies of the person he worked with, biographies of just the Victorian period, and the annotated Dracula, which was a phenomenal book. And like every piece of research I did made me excited and gave me more ideas for the show. I would read a piece of something that was true and that fed the idea. And I was like, oh, and that would look like this and that would look like this. Um, I think that sh when you're doing research, it should have that effect on you. It should make you more excited about what you're doing. If it feels like a slog or you're bored to tears, then um, it's not necessarily serving you, and you should look to other sorts of research. But I did find that, like, and we would say this on Grey's Anatomy too with the medicine. It was a little harder for me to think in terms of medicine in this way, but like knowing all of the steps of what the doctors had to do would lead to story. It would help shape the story in the direction that it wanted to go. Because you'd say like, oh, this is a deflated ventricle, and I'm feeling deflated in my romantic life. I mean, we would strive to have better examples than that, but I think the research should excite you and thrill you and make you feel like it should feel like you're adding wood to the fire.
Yeah, thank you for the class today. So my question is like, how do you, once you come up with your story or a storyline, how do you translate that into like like scenes, like, and how do we decide what is the best scene in the specific genre that we selected, and how long each scene has to be, and when do I have to like cut the scene here, and now I have to like go to the next scene, and then also I'm sure like each of the scenes has to come to the same point, like that you want to tell. So how do we like lay out this entire process, like for like in terms of translating your story into onto the screen, so that we can play a very good movie for audience.
Yeah. So there's a book that's hard to get nowadays, I think. And not everything in this book is perfect, but a lot of it is extremely wonderful. It's called Story by Robert McKee. If you saw Adaptation, uh, what's his name? Logan Roy plays this guy in the movie, and he gives advice about story structure. But one of the things that he says that I think is very important is that every scene, so when I'm coming up with what my story is, I turn it into, I say, beats. So these are the beats of the story. Um, you know, the character has to learn this piece of information. They take an action based on that piece of information, and that leads them to this step, that leads them to this. So you get it into just like one sentence little pieces for the steps of what the story would look like. Then you can see which of those beats can be combined into one beat. So uh, you know, I want to establish the dynamic that she has with her father, and also I can use that scene to talk about the legal case that she's working on because her father has some experience about it and she could talk to him about it. And you're advancing the emotional component of her life and the just the story element of the story that's happening. Um, you generally want there to be a value change in every scene. So your character enters a scene with one expectation, and we know what the reader knows what they think is going to happen, and something different happens, or it happens in a different way, or it happens and it leads to another unexpected consequence. So that and uh, they went into the scene with a plus sign, and then that turns into a minus sign. And that's what I would think about with every scene. Um, you know, what are we learning? How are the emotions advancing the story in it? And they generally say that you should try to come into a scene as late as possible and leave it as early as possible. So, you know, I don't know how logical your personal mind is versus how little you care, but like obviously when two people are standing in a room, one of them opened the door and walked into the room, and then another one walked in and came into the room, and then they looked at each other and they started talking. Like you don't need any of that in the scene. We just come into the scene and they're talking. So that's what I mean by coming in later. Uh, you want to you want to never to repeat information. So another example of this is like if I go and talk to the wizard and the wizard gives me a bunch of information, and I need to go tell my brother. You don't want to go to a scene of me telling my brother all. You might instead want to go to a scene of my brother reacting to all the information that we just gave the audience. So we in our minds filled in the blanks of he went there and he told him everything. And so you're skipping and cheating time that way. Um, yeah, a value change, an expectation that changes, um, how you can tell how long it should be, you'll you'll sort of that will sort of come to you as I think the more that you practice it. But I think a good example of that is reading scenes, reading produced screenplays. I think that will help you quite a bit. It's weird. I say this like your goal is to get so used to writing that you forget how you do it, which can make talking about it to other people a little hard. But there's a way that I had a boss one time and he would look at the outline and he would just write beside it 1.5, 2 3/4, you know, one half. He could look at a scene and he knew how much space it should take up on a page just as the outline. And um I think you're going to have to just do a little trial and error with that. And I will also say, just in case it doesn't come up and there's not another way to do it, if you have exposition that you need to get across, and by exposition, I just mean like this is the functioning mechanics of how this story works, and the audience needs to understand something that they might not understand, and I need to explain it to them. Like it's important for them to know how boats work. It's important for them to know how the explosives work. A very helpful thing I learned is that exposition like that is can be gotten across more interestingly in conflict, or in humor. So instead of saying, here's what happens when the boat does this, you have people arguing about it. You say, I need you to put the turbo thruster on the boat so it goes through that way. And it's like, you idiot, I've been telling you this your entire life. If you try to rush things like that, once you get to the atoll, the boat won't be able to turn around. Like people are just going to be more likely to be entertained and picked up when it's conflict.
Great. We've got time for a couple more questions. I wanted to just ask, and let me ask, when you're asking your question to please stand up. I wanted to ask you first though, Andy, you mentioned reading scripts, and I think reading scripts is really valuable. I worked as an assistant and was forced to read scripts and write coverage. That's a good way to read a lot. But practically speaking, what do you find is I think a lot of students, a lot of people hear that advice, but then don't know where to get started or which scripts to read or how to approach that. Do you have any suggestions for how to follow through on that advice of reading a lot of scripts?
Well, the good news is there's more things available to y'all now than there have ever been available in an easier way. You used to have to like go to a flea market or, find a published book, but I would I would start with your favorite movies. So, I love Ella Enchanted. Google screenplay Ella Enchanted, and then you'll find it. You'll find a PDF of that, and I think there's even just free databases of all these things. And just read your favorite scripts first, and then you'll just see the language that they're using and the tricks that they're doing, and you'll see what made it into the final movie and what didn't. Um, but it like I remember The Grifters has a really great script. LA Confidential has a really great script. Um, Anything Spike Lee has done has a great script. Like just I would start with ones that you really like and then maybe branch into ones that are similar comps to what you're doing. So if you're writing a horror movie that's not like a slasher film, then look up some scripts for some slow burn horror movies and read those. Um, you'll also find in general that even the scripts for bad movies are usually good. Um, the script is the part when the most people have to believe in this movie and be excited about it, and they're going to put all their money behind it, et cetera, et cetera. And it's got to be like I remember, like I read the script for Gone in 60 Seconds, which is like a car heist movie. And I was like, man, this script is great. Like they're just fully selling every visual and every moment that's happening and everything's being explained to me. So um, I just think it's really useful. But yeah, I would start with your favorites and then I would look for comps. And then I would study, ask yourself like, why do I like this? What is good about this? And then you can just steal stuff. There's language that's used in scripts that you'll find just comes in handy, uh, and you'll pick those up from other writers, and it, it's fine.
Great. Okay. Two more questions, Jared.
Yeah.
Can you
So-
stand up?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hello. So when you do so, or when you sell a script to for like a TV show or possibly a movie, how much control of that script would you have once it's sold?
In the feature world, unless you're very famous, you're gonna have much less control. The feature world is notorious for you get hired, they buy the script and they buy a certain amount of rewrites from you. So you'll go through these steps and do like, your first rewrite, your second rewrite, your third rewrite. Then contractually, they're kind of done, and they'll either uh, ideally, it's great enough that they can just take it and shoot it, but you're not usually on set on a feature as a writer. Um, uh, in television, it's almost the opposite. When you sell a script, they're they're buying you as the visionary to either be the head writer or to be the showrunner, or if you're a younger writer, a co-showrunner, they'll bring in a showrunner and then you're there helping. But in television, writers have way more control over the process because the you're writing it's not just a movie that's done and comes out. Like the ship has to keep coming and the stories have to keep being generated, so the writers know the characters the best. They know the sets backwards and forwards, and you write it, you're at the table read, you're helping do the casting for the guest cast, you're usually on set for the entire shoot, you're giving notes to the director for the performance, you're looking at the edit and the cut and giving notes on the cut. So yeah, in television, it's a lot more involvement. There's a lot more like ghost writing and other kinds of stuff that goes on in the feature world.
Well, one last thing. Could you also own the rights to that script even if you sold it to the TV show or the movie?
You would, it depends on how good your agent and lawyer are, but when you're starting out, that's very difficult. I would say if you wrote a script that all the buyers are obsessed with and want, then you've got them over a barrel and you're going to have more of an opportunity to be able to make the kind of deal that you want to make. But, um, like even that is kind of rare. Like George Lucas had a really incredible deal when he had all of the he owned the negatives and he owned the marketing and like toy distribution and stuff, and it's made him super super rich. But those deals are harder to come across, and I'd say if you're when you're brand new, you have to be ready to, you had your kid and it's their first day of school and you're putting them on the bus and you're just going to hope that they come back and you recognize them.
Thank you.
Firstly, I want to say that there were a lot of things from your talk that I really related to, like using TV as escapism in early life and such, as well as the process of just imagining and walking and such to create stories. So I'm in a place where I've developed like a bunch of shorts. I've even made like some mini series and maybe even a franchise. Even that's all coming in the future. But the main hurdle I have mainly is wondering how am I going to start to pitch these ideas to companies and producers and shareholders and such like that, especially in the living in the East Coast, which I'm planning to stay for the foreseeable future, to be determined later. But how would you suggest someone like us to start pitching our ideas to shareholders and to people who have the money to make our projects a reality?
That might be a question that is a little out of my wheelhouse because I pursue things in such a traditional model. Like I've never gone to try to find an investor like that. I think what I would try to do is get your material together, like your package. Like this is my sizzle reel, this is my example of whatever, and then try to get in touch with literary managers and who would then have those connections that you could do. Um, because I don't know much about just cold calling production companies or investors or things like that without some sort of representation. And in that case, you're going to want to go back to the come correct part of this talk, which is just make sure that that you've got if it like you're on Shark Tank, here's my idea, here's how it's going to work, here's how it's going to make money for you, and here's what I need to do it. And if you're making some of these projects yourself, then you're building up that body of work that's easier for you to share with people, and that's going to be really helpful. But yeah, I think I would just try to get in touch with I mean, there's managers in New York and agents, so you're going to want to pound the pavement a little bit and try to find somebody uh, who you like, and maybe look at projects that you like and look at who were those producers were, and then try to get meetings with those companies.
So essentially door to door.
Sorry?
Essentially door to door.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's because I don't know. So I mean, I could, I think that's just a different master class when it comes to getting the financing. So I'm sorry. Somebody ask a question I can't answer quick.
We can do one more question. One more.
Hello. For a last question, I remember you mentioning about writing on a desk and how it's not the best because of your back. And so I'm wondering, what would you think is the most ideal place to write?
So anything, there's a lot of pressure here. So you want to sit, you want to have your feet out in front of you, not tucked under your body, because that's bad for your back. I've thrown out my back; it's the worst thing I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But for me, I just like to sit at a laptop, and you want your arms kind of like, elbow down and like typing just forward like that. But even then, you can get into some back issues. But yeah, and just do a lot of mobility. You all are so young. Do mobility exercises, like sit on the floor and stand back up. Things that you think that'll never be a problem. One day you'll scream, and So yeah, just don't there is mass dormancy within the writing world. And so you want to feed your body by getting out there and doing some other kind of movement because you're not just a blob of a brain.
I see, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's been a wonderful time hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And they're probably, I don't know if it would go through Dr. Fuchs or Renee, but like I'm a um I'm a big believer. Like I would love for there to be a network of more people who went to Mason who are out here and making things. And it doesn't have to even be that if you're from Virginia, but like I'm proud of my alma mater, and so I would love to continue to be a resource if possible, or if there's any questions that people had that didn't get a chance to offer them or you wish you had asked, like feel free to send them to me, and I'll do my best to help out with that.
Great. Well, that's very generous. Thank you so much, Andy. And yeah, I think we've all learned a lot, and I think inspired too to go out and write. I just one last parting question: what do you love about writing? What inspires you about writing? What do you love about it?
With television, I really love that you can go from Monday writing something on your computer to Wednesday professionals who are amazing at their job building the things that only existed in your mind a couple days earlier and bringing it to life. We had I remember one of I think my first episode of Charmed, one of the characters got possessed by some spider demon and then like spun the other one up in this cocoon kind of thing. And I walked to set and they just had like this, thing that was the size of Holly Marie Combs wrapped up in spider web silk with the little shoes, and it looked so real that it was scary to me. And I was like, man, that just all started here. And there's people that can bring it to life, and uh, that is really rewarding. And I would always also say that like being a part of a longer line of people who inspired you and you learned from, and that at this moment in time when I'm alive, being able to help other people, because believe me, this is all learned. It's not like some people uh, have more of are lean more in the direction of being better at certain things. But I made terrible grades. I was such a dum dum, and I just thought nothing would ever become of me. And almost none of my teachers thought anything would become of me. But you can work on the thing and become really good at it and make it and make your dream come true. So stick with it and write things that you love and care about.
Thank you so much, Andy. One more hand for Andy.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, like, I don't know, whoever is there who would be in charge of putting people in touch with me who want to be in touch with me, you have my blessing, just not my home address.
All right, thank you. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you, Andy.
Take care, y'all. Bye bye.